In my travels as an explorer and a biologist, I've been inspired by many people who are working tirelessly to better our world. In this series, I'm seeing how their vision is helping drive change and protect the planet, and what each of us can do to make a real difference. Faith Doherty is one of the world's most fearless environmental campaigners. Over the years, she's campaigned against nuclear weapons, the theft of natural resources, and more recently, deforestation in Southeast Asia. In defense of the planet, Faith has faced huge dangers and has come close to paying the ultimate price. But thankfully, she is still here, she is still fighting, and the world is a better place for it. Faith Doherty, welcome to Changemakers.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for coming. So, you were born in Malaysia.
I was.
Extraordinary part of the world. Growing up in one of the most biodiverse parts of the world must have had an impact on you.
I don't think so, really. I mean, when you're that young, you don't really sort of consider it. But, you know, it was warm weather, great weather, but I was predominantly spent most of my youth swimming.
Okay.
I was a competitor, I was a swimmer, I loved it. But yeah, I guess we would travel and see amazing things, not just in Malaysia, but around the region.
I'd assumed that growing up surrounded by nature had been one of the things that sparked your interest, but maybe not. So what was it that sparked your interest in activism and environmentalism?
I was just an angry woman. I was just angry at everybody and everything. And, you know, I really sort of got my political backbone, if you like, when I joined the women's movement against nuclear weapons. You know, I was very young, but it really opened my eyes to a lot of injustice generally, and wondering why on earth, you know, this was all happening. And that sort of led me down the sort of anti-militarization route, if you like. I was surrounded by women, really tough, strong, marvelous women who were using their voice. And yeah, that gave me the sort of political kind of open my eyes to a lot of things, and that's where that started. So it didn't really start. I loved animals, we grew up with dogs, you know, but it didn't really start because I wanted to save the elephant. It started because I was just angry that people were making bad decisions.
Yeah. So was that nuclear activism you were doing, and you're part of Greenpeace's direct action team, was that from some kind of feeling of existential threats to the planet, to the world, to the environment, or just anger about bad decisions?
Well, I think it was all of those things. I was coordinating a campaign with Greenpeace called the Nuclear Free Seas campaign. And I was on the Vega, which is one of the first boats. Well, it's a ketch, 38-foot ketch that went to Mururoa, where they placed themselves under the nuclear bombs.
Yeah, incredible.
Sailed on that from New Zealand to Russia. Took the Rainbow Warrior into Russia.
Wow.
Chased submarines around the Pacific. And whilst on those boats, really opened my eyes to the ocean and marine life, actually, and of course, whales. Our job was to expose the truth, was to expose what was really happening. And that's what I did with Greenpeace.
That atmosphere on the ships must have been unbelievable. I've got a couple of friends that worked with Bob Hunter, the founder of Greenpeace, and Paul Watson back in the early days, and they lived on the ship, so they spent all day fighting the man, and then they'd come back and have these intense parties. And I can only imagine that was a heady atmosphere. Can you describe what was it like living on a Greenpeace ship back in the day?
Well, I was surrounded by experts. I was surrounded by people much older than me and, you know, really experienced. You know, there was a great team of people. And yeah, we had fun, of course, but it was also quite serious. You know, these are big issues. And yes, when we would go into port, there would be a party or two, that's for sure. But it was an incredible experience and such a unique organisation in that sense of actually taking it right out. And the whole thing I learnt then was you've got to be able to take these big issues, bring them into people's living rooms and say, look, this is wrong, but here's a solution and this is what we want to do. And Greenpeace gave me that. That was the thing that I learnt most from them.
You talk about the non-violent activism, and that was really key, but a lot of the way that Greenpeace were approached by the authorities was very violent.
Oh yeah, we had the stormtroopers on the Warrior from Russia.
Totally.
We had, oh yes, no, absolutely. But hey, we're the adults in the room at the end of the day.
Yeah, I'd love to hear. You must have been in some punch-ups as well.
We're professionals at the end of the day, but you got to hold your ground and just not fight back violently, physically.
In chronology terms, you were working with Greenpeace in the anti-nuclear activism. You then found yourself in Burma working on democratic rights.
Well, yeah, that was completely not in the plan. I was approached by a man who had been elected in Burma in the 1990 elections. I had no idea about anything, really. I got to the Thai-Burmese border, was invited to meet with the students that had fled in '88, meeting with the Karen military there, which is the indigenous Karen from that place that had been fighting, you know, since with the Brits in Second World War. And whilst we were there, I went a bit further and I got off the boat and I left the Crown. I wanted to stay a couple more days and hang out. And it just so happened while we were there, the place got bombed.
By the government?
By the military, yeah. And we were fine. I mean, they knew exactly what to do. Yeah. And that was it. I was just like, this is tough, man. So
you joined the People's Resistance?
No, I didn't. I've never picked up a gun. I've never done that at all. No way. I really thought hard. And the only thing I could really bring to the table was trying to see if I could support any access for them to have political dialogue with people around the world. Because, you know, it's very tough sometimes knowing about a country and all you hear are the terrible things that happen, which is important. But there's never that access to people who really are the future.
I understand that one of the things you were trying to do was to target the people doing business with the military regime in Burma. Sure. People like Texaco and Chevron.
Absolutely.
Who have poor reputations.
Total, actually, is the worst.
Another one.
Right,
okay.
Yeah.
Was that effective? That type of advocacy? Targeting them, trying to stopping them from doing business with this corrupt
Well, it didn't
regime?
Stop them doing business. It did make them have to spend more money in order to try and whitewash what they were doing. There were some very brave people who did a lot of investigations.
Oil and natural gas are crucial to the survival of the Burmese military. A giant new pipeline carrying gas 245 miles from the Burmese coast to the Thai capital promises £300 million a year in revenue for the generals.
So they built the pipeline. Unocal and others divested for a bit, and then others came back in. Premier Oil, which was a UK company, completely divested. Okay. So we got them out. Yeah. But the impact of that pipeline was such that you had hundreds of thousands of people forcibly displaced off their lands, who ended up in refugee camps in Thailand. I think I became a permanent fixer for many, many journalists during that time, trying to get them across the border to see what was going on. But that's the only thing I could really bring to the table, was to expose it, highlight it, find ways where we could stop it ever happening again, if you like. But unfortunately, here we are again, 2021, military coup in February, and we're back there again. So,
well, again, we need the spotlight shone on it again.
Absolutely,
that's what needs to
absolutely.
Happen,
I had to leave Thailand for various reasons. I'd been there, I'd overstayed my welcome a bit, I think.
So by this time, you were working with one of my favourite organisations, the Environmental Investigations Agency. Tell me a bit about how EIA operated in those early days.
Just pretty much the same it does now. So we do a lot of research and we go in the field and do investigations. And there are different types of investigations. There's the field work, monitoring, investigating openly, and then there's the undercover investigations that take place. And then once the evidence is collated and once we've dotted the I's and crossed the T's, and really gone through everything that we have, we then make it public. But then that is supported by advocacy, obviously. And if we have to go back, we go back. Sometimes these investigations can take 3 or 4 years. It takes a lot of experience. It takes a lot of commitment to keep focused. I mean, this is one of the things I love about working at EIA, is that we can, you put yourself down on something and you really get into it and you stick to it, because that is when you will get results. It's really about having that support in an organization that allows you to think 3, 4, 5 years down the track. And that is why the quality of our work is so good. And I'm really, really proud of it. I think it's an amazing organization. It really is. Yeah.
Moving on to Indonesia.
Yes.
In 1998, President Suharto stepped down after 30 years of dictatorship.
Yeah.
And kind of created a vacuum of power, which was filled by a load of criminals who then started to seriously exploit the forests in Indonesia. Can you describe what happened to Indonesia's forests in the years after Suharto stepped down?
Well, basically what you had, under Suharto, you had criminal cartel, really, that was exploiting all the natural resources that Indonesia has to offer. And it was all controlled through the centre. And when he fell, everything opened up for anybody else to take opportunity. And that's exactly what happened. It was chaos. I have never seen anything like it. It was just absolute chaos, logging everywhere. And this is where we first came upon what was going on in Tanjung Puting National Park, where orangutans live. A really interesting place. It's rather wonderful being in a canoe and going down the river and seeing all of this. Actually, it's a swamp forest, so it's not exactly the...
That's grim.
Yeah, I know. Realise. I'm so glad you think so, because what the hell,
Anyone that says they love a rainforest hasn't been to one.
That's what I think too. I'm really glad you agree, because it's not.
It's itchy, you've been bitten, stung, sweaty.
But once you're there for a while, it's it kind of gets into your skin. I love it. It's great.
Likewise.
The guy who's running the raft said there's about 900 logs. You can see by the size of them that they've obviously cut them quite in the interior. And what they're doing is because there's been a lot of rain, this is a really good time for them to transport these logs downriver to the sawmill. Now what's going to happen is that this timber is going to be sold at a very cheap price because it's illegal.
Indonesia's such a large archipelago that there was no way we could tackle everything. So we just focused on the national park. It was illegal to log in a national park, regardless of who was in charge of the country.
So this is
Buriti Galdegas, one of the Professor Leakey graduates, was also working there at the time.
The net effect of this massive illegal logging in national parks and other protected areas is there is absolutely no place for wildlife to be safe. There's absolutely no sanctuary for orangutans as a species. There's no place they can run to. There's no place they can hide, because the forests are all disappearing.
So we decided to investigate where the wood was going, what it was being used for, and it was a kind of a soft hardwood called ramin. It's a very tall tree, lovely tree, very blonde, and it was being used for snooker cues, cribs, and a lot of artists use it for their pictures, frames.
It's something so banal as a snooker cue causing mass deforestation in the tropics.
Yeah, it was
crazy to make that link.
But also driving crime.
Yeah.
This was the real thing that got to us, is that we realised the core of this was corruption.
Yeah.
And so we investigated it, and that's how it all started, really.
Are you comfortable talking about it?
Oh, absolutely fine. I mean, it happened a long time ago. But I think when I was kidnapped, I've never been so scared in my life. I mean, just sheer terror, absolute terror.
Talk me through, how did it happen?
Well, we had released a report exposing a major timber baron who was politically connected in Indonesia, of basically logging a national park. And we had published the first report that really laid out who was involved and what was happening. And myself and an Indonesian colleague, we went back to see what had happened. And it was there that we were picked up by the timber barons. People taken to the office. Rui was beaten very badly. I was beaten. They broke my fingers. And we spent the next 3 days People were trying to negotiate to get us out.
We've just been told that they are going to mobilise the Navy and military troops in order to help get us out.
And we didn't know what was happening, and I was like, I don't really want to leave this space, because there were a lot of armed, very angry mobs of men outside wanting to kill us. But anyway, Rui said to me, we go. And we get into a Jeep, and that Jeep then goes to the airport. We got to the airport, and there were a lot of people standing alongside the runway, and there was the sight of this wonderful little plane. And we said goodbye, we got on the plane, and we got out of there.
Embassies?
Oh, yes. I mean, funnily enough, afterwards, every single person I met apparently was the one that got me out.
Yeah,
so I was, and I don't know, I was forever grateful, because I think there was an enormous effort.
Great.
And the person who had actually kidnapped me, he is now the governor of the province.
Wow.
That family is, you know, it's a great story on how somebody who started off by just shaving bark, poor family, shaving bark off logs, has become this huge, you know, timber baron. It's a great way of seeing how corruption helps to facilitate all of this. Yeah.
Thanks to the work that you were doing in Indonesia, started to see deforestation come under control a little bit, relatively, in comparison. Degradation come under control. Did that then just switch your attention elsewhere because you realised that problems were happening just further afield?
Not quite. I mean, it wasn't quite like, oh, we fix this, let's go there, because it's not fixed, okay? But basically what we were doing is we were following, where is the timber going, who's buying it, who's involved, what's the methodology, etc. And of course, you know, we found ourselves working deep inside Vietnam, deep inside Laos, and I was just waiting for an opportunity to get into Burma. And 2012, EIA, led by myself, we went into Myanmar, into Burma. And, you know, it's always been opaque as a country anyway, but this sector, wow, you're talking about really dark holes here. So we just started investigating. And of course, the biggest place where logging was taking place was in the northwest, and it was going across into China.
One of the most powerful things that EIA does is the imagery that they make public. Can you talk to me about some of the images through your career that stand out as having shifted the dial in some way?
Well, the biggest one for me was when we were in Burma. One of the things EIA does is, when we can, we work very closely with people on the ground, obviously. Sometimes they're partners, sometimes they're just associates. And we tend to try and bring some of our skills so that they can have something that they can work with. So cameras, how to do filming, how do you do desk-based research, how do you keep safe when you're in the field doing this stuff. And it just so happened it was at this time where one of our partners had gone to this area and sat on a motorbike, and literally there was just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of trucks with ancient trees. I mean, there were, you know, some of them only had one log on the truck, because that was how big it was. And they just filmed it on the side of the motorbike, right through the middle of this column of trucks. It was extraordinary. And I think that really shocked people when we got that footage and were able to, you know, when you get stuff like that, it's so rare because you're in areas that people just don't go, and it's dangerous, you know. And so we put a film together, together with a report, and we use it to show the sheer scale of what we're talking about here.
Where were those trees going?
China.
Interesting.
So China is one of the largest consumers of timber in the world.
Still?
Still. We've been trying for 2 decades now to get China to recognize their footprint and what's going on. So for example, in Myanmar, when we first went there as EIA with this campaign, one of the first things we wanted to do was get a log export ban. so that it was very clear. It is illegal to export logs. It doesn't matter from where or to whom, it is illegal. It's very clear. And they put that in place. So we wanted China to reciprocate by having a log import ban, but they wouldn't do it. And this is one of the things, it's a tactic we've used globally with countries measuring their political will in terms of response, right? And in the case of China, they just wouldn't do it. The response we get is that it is not their responsibility if something is illegal in another country. So, you know, it's, yeah, you don't have to, yeah, absolutely. But we've been pressuring them. And the irony about all of this, what's so bonkers about this, is that they won't do it for timber. But as you may or may not know, at the COP in Glasgow, they, together with the United States, have committed to address the issue of illegal deforestation globally. So it's sort of, okay, so show what you mean. Let's get this done.
So what you're touching on is the other half of the work that the EIA does. So some of it's frontline, they're getting these amazing images and bringing them to the public's attention. The other half, or probably more than that, is the background, the lobbying,
absolutely,
working with governments to try and ban the importation of tropical hardwoods. How is that process? Is that deeply frustrating, or are you seeing chinks of light?
You've got to have a plan, obviously, and you've got to find out who really counts here. How do we actually get them? So who do we need to see? What do we need to do? You know, there's a lot of work involved in that. And most people are decent, you know, and it's just, most people are decent. And if you can give them a way to arrive at where you want to be without them losing their jobs, you know, it's really helpful. But you need to be tenacious. You need to really be able to reach people. If I've actually been somewhere, then there's a huge difference in the way that I'm able to bring the problem to the table and explain and etc. What's even better is when you can actually bring people from that country to come and speak.
EIA and Telepac are invited to Brussels to brief a group of concerned MEPs and EU officials. Accompanying them is Fred Sagisolo of the Kanasai Mos people in West Papua. Indonesia's ambassador to the EU and other interested parties also attend.
Di sana hutan yang sangat terbatas. Hutan yang menjadi kebanggaan masyarakat adat, ternyata atas penekanan. Bekerja sama dengan pemerintah Indonesia dalam menanggulangi perdagangan kayu ilegal. Terima kasih.
And then, of course, there's always walking into somebody's office and plonking down a tablet and saying, watch that. Now you tell me if that's right, you know, seeing. So there's a lot of ways that you can actually make people change their minds.
There have been some major wins in terms of legislation over the years, one of which is the EU timber regulation in 2013.
Yeah.
Can you talk me through what that is, why it's important, and what we've won as a result of having that in place?
Okay. When we were in Indonesia and it was all chaotic and everything, and we were just thinking, God, you know, what can we do here? Who's actually buying this stuff? What's driving it? And obviously you've got to look at the markets. So yes, China is the largest consumer, but also so's Europe.
Yeah.
And that's where we can really have influence. All we wanted from the very beginning was to have a law that would allow enforcement officials to seize illegally sourced timber. That's all we wanted, a law that could be used. But in typical EU fashion, it turned into this whole different approach of due diligence and a prohibition. And basically it meant that people had to say the origin of where the wood came from, which is very good. And it is something everyone should always ask, is where did this come from? And nobody knew a lot of the time. Having been in the field, bringing what was really going on there to the table in Europe, it turned out that we got the European Union timber regulation. We also have that law in the UK as well, post-Brexit, that's there. So you can win, you can. If you have a vision and you stick with it, you can win.
Projects that you've worked on for your entire life have been guided by your passions. Are there any passion projects that you're still waiting to turn your metaphorical guns on in the next few years?
I have no plans. I
Open to offers?
not even that. I follow where my heart takes me in the work, but I'm not quite finished yet.
Good.
I am tired, so I'm just going to keep focusing at the moment on. Yeah, definitely.
Faith Doherty, thank you so much for coming on to Changemakers and telling
you're
us
welcome.
about your extraordinary life.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Great
Thank you.
talking to you.